Mr. Shinichi Asazuma, Consul General of Japan in Frankfurt, dear Reinhard Bütikofer, Honorable Member of the European Parliament, Dr. Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp, dear Christoph Kerr von Plettenberg, Chairman of the Regional Forum Frankfurt of the DGAP, dear members of the DGAP, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rolf Nikel. I'm a former diplomat and now Vice President of the German Council on Foreign Relations and moderator of today's conference. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to today's online conference organized by the Consulate General of Japan in Frankfurt, the German Council on Foreign Relations, and the DGAP Regional Forum Frankfurt. With this conference, we continue an already well-established practice of close cooperation between partners in Germany and Japan. It comes at the very day when a new coalition of the Social Democrats, Green and Liberals will enter office in Germany. And it takes place only one day before the Summit for Democracies convened by President Biden tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. We're very grateful to all our panelists for making time in their busy schedule. I'd like to particularly thank those of you who suffer from Corona or are in quarantine because of Corona for nevertheless joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. The subject of today's conference, rising geopolitical competition in the Indo-Pacific, common interests and approaches of Japan and Germany, is extremely important and timely. Both of our two countries, but of course the whole EU and countries of the region, share an interest in regional stability based on observance of the rules-based international order. Unfortunately, at the moment, things are not moving in the right direction, and growing geopolitical tensions have put the Indo-Pacific in the focus of a systemic rivalry. Even though Japan and Germany have benefited for a long time from economic interconnectedness, and still do, questions of technological competition and their implications for national security have come to the fore. And worst of all, aggressive military posturing have raised the specter of a confrontation between highly armed countries. The purpose of this meeting today is threefold: to analyze the geopolitical situation in the region and the interests and strategies of Germany and Japan, as well as other important players. Secondly, to evaluate what Germany, the EU, and Japan can do to successfully pursue their regional and broader interests. And thirdly, draw conclusions how Germany and Japan can address the issues together. I'll be back in a minute to moderate today's debate. But before I do that, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Shinichi Asazuma, Consul General of Japan in Frankfurt, for his introductory remarks. The floor is yours, sir.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Nikel, and good morning, everybody, and maybe in good afternoon in Japan, and good morning. I am very pleased to be able to hold a co-sponsored project with the DGAP Frankfurt again following last March this year. I sincerely appreciate Mr. von Plettenberg and the colleagues of DGAP Frankfurt for arranging today's seminar. I would also like to thank Professor Yuichi Hosoya, Mr. Reinhard Bütikofer, Dr. Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp, and of course, Mr. Ambassador Rolf Nikel, who participate today in spite of your busy schedule. We, Japan and Germany, are important partners who share fundamental values, and cooperation is becoming more important as the international situation became more severe and complicated. The Indo-Pacific region is the center of future economic growth in the world. The government of Japan has been promoting the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific since 2016. The fact that this region remains free and open also contributes to the stability of the international community. The government of Germany opened its Indo-Pacific policy guidelines last year, and the European Union announced the strategy towards this region last September as well. We highly appreciated that the importance of the Indo-Pacific region to Europe and Germany has been widely recognized. As you know, cooperation in multilateral framework has recently progressed in the region in a wide range of fields, such as the effort to combat climate change and infectious diseases by the so-called Quad of Japan, United States, India, and Australia, and the launch of AUKUS efforts in the security field. This year, the German Navy frigate Bayern had visited the Indo-Pacific region and made great achievements, including visiting Japan and doing joint exercise with Japanese self-defense forces. Furthermore, in the new coalition of agreement, what we call the signal coalition, Ampel coalition of federal government, I understand today will be established. It is clearly stated that the new federal government will place importance on the Indo-Pacific region. Those movements we would like to welcome, of course. On the other hand, in the Indo-Pacific region, the universal values and rule-based order of the current international community are being challenged by attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion unilaterally. This is what I actually felt in my previous workplace personally in Vietnam, Hanoi. In order to achieve stability and peaceful development in this region, it is important for nations that share fundamental common values to cooperate. In today's opportunity, I hope we will have a meaningful discussion on the ideal form of the cooperation between Japan, Germany, or Europe with this background in mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Asazuma, for your introductory remarks. I would now like to ask my colleague, Mark Fisher, to present our housekeeping rules for what promises to be a very interesting 75 minutes of debate.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Nikel. And I'll be very brief. I'm standing in for Christoph Kerr from Plettenberg, who can't be with us today, sadly, but who has worked so hard to make this happen. So thank you again to him. Very quickly, we are, number one, we are very grateful for the cooperation with the Japanese General Consulate, which is a pleasure to work with. And it's already the second event. We hope there will be many more that we can work together because the topics, I think, will always be current. Housekeeping. Number one, as you saw as a reminder at the beginning, this event is recorded in video and audio. Just as a reminder, we will make it available also on social media channels after the event. Number two, the scripting, so to say, for the event is we will first have short presentations by the speakers, by the panelists. Then we will go on a moderated debate among the panel. And then in the last part, we will have questions and answers from the audience. You can ask questions through the chat function, but also by virtually raising your hand with the symbols in the Zoom platform. That's already it. It will be my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to an interesting debate. I'm handing back to Rolf.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark Fisher, for reminding us of the ground rules of this debate and the necessary disciplines that they entail. It's now my great pleasure and honor to call on our first speaker, Professor Yuichi Hosoya. Professor Hosoya is Professor of International Relations at Keio University, Tokyo. He's also Managing Director and Research Director at the Asia-Pacific Initiative, Senior Researcher at the Nakasone Peace Institute, and serves at a number of other very distinguished institutions. He's also a visiting fellow at the University of Cambridge. Professor Hosoya is a prolific writer on security issues in the Asia-Pacific region. Professor Hosoya, I will start with a general question to you. How do you see, from a Japanese perspective, the growing tensions in the region evolving? How dangerous is it for Japanese broader interests? How do you evaluate the level of political, economic, and possible military threat emanating from the PRC, from the People's Republic of China? Please limit yourself in your introductory remarks, possibly, if possible, to 5 to 6 minutes. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for a very kind introduction. And also, I'm also very grateful for the organizer of this event. I think this event is quite timely because we are in a very important moment. We are in a turning point in history, perhaps a global history, because of a couple of reasons. I will explain why. First of all, it is a very dangerous time. Of course, it is quite likely that China will perhaps do something in East Asia, particularly both East China Sea and South China Sea, on Taiwan issue particularly. There are several issues. One of the issues is that China is now slowing down its economy, and China is now tightening up its governance. And of course, people are very frustrated, not just because of the coronavirus, but also because of the lack of freedom and lack of democracy and slowing down of economic growth. Previously, ordinary Chinese people are happy with the rapid economic growth level. But nowadays, because of the slowing down of economic growth, that's why Chinese leader Xi Jinping now needs to rely much on nationalism or national unity to promote national unity, because now President Xi Jinping's regime is going into the third term. Without any result, it will be very difficult for the current government in China to prove its record. That's why it's, well, no doubt that the current regime really like to unify its country by integrating Taiwan. But I have a feeling that the Chinese government doesn't like to have a war. So that's why first priority is to unify Taiwan without the war. But because of the now much more hard-lined United States policy towards China, I think that now Chinese leaders are thinking that now it is a time, perhaps, to mobilize some of its muscles or military power to try to unify the country. But still, I think that the China prefer much more indirect method to unify that country. The other thing that we have to think about is that China is much more isolated in the international community. More and more leading players, including, of course, Germany, France, UK, not just United States, India, or Australia, I mean the Quad country with Japan. These leading players are much more frustrated than the current Chinese assertive actions. So because of the trends we can see both in China and the United States, I think that it is much more likely than before that we will see some kind of unintended, unexpected things happen in East Asia or in the Pacific region. So we have to prevent this kind of unintended military clash happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosoya, for your overview of the situation in the region. You have given us some food for thought, which we will certainly come back to later. Please allow me now to call on the Honorable Reinhard Bütikofer, member of the Green Party in the European Parliament. Reinhard Bütikofer sits on the Committee on Foreign Affairs and chairs the delegation of the European Parliament for the relations with the People's Republic of China. He looks back on a long and successful career as co-chair of the European Green Party and co-chair of Bündnis 90 Die Grünen, the German Green Party. He also serves in a number of NGOs and advisory boards. Mr. Bütikofer, you participate in the coalition talks for the new German so-called traffic light coalition. How do you see the new coalition acting vis-à-vis the Indo-Pacific? How much continuity? How much change do you expect, particularly vis-à-vis China? Possibly you can give some concrete examples where you see these things evolving. So please, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Nikel, for including me in this conversation. I value this opportunity. And let me start by agreeing with Professor Hosoya that we are at a decisive moment of developments in the international relationship. And as the famous baseball philosopher Yogi Berra once said, if you get to a fork in the road, take it. Question is, which prong are we going to choose? This government that is going to be sworn in today in Berlin has chosen to attribute more attention to the Indo-Pacific than probably any other before. You will find interesting language when you look at the coalition agreement, the coalition contract. And you will also find that there is a clear emphasis on the necessity to create strategic solidarity between democracies, and there is new emphasis on the cooperation with like-minded countries. In this regard, Japan, India, and also the ASEAN group of nations in Southeast Asia play a particularly relevant role. And one of the proposals from the coalition contract is that the governments of Germany and of Japan should start having regular government-to-government consultations in the future, similar to what we've had with a number of other governments, including the Chinese. So I think that signals that there is a new willingness to engage with some preferred partners. Of course, the coalition agreement also looks at China, and I guess it would be fair to say that indeed there is a certain paradigm shift. This is has been commented upon at some length from different sides. This new approach is not all that new, however. What we set out to do is to develop a more European China policy for Germany. Basically, what the coalition—
We cannot hear you very well.
What the coalition sets out to do is to— Sorry, Ambassador, I don't know what the problem is. My screen tells me that I'm.
Yeah, it is difficult to hear you because there seems to be a technical problem.
Ambassador, it might be on your side because
it may be on my side.
Look with the other ones.
Please continue.
Okay. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was about to say there is a new approach towards dealing with China, and this is reflected, for instance, in the fact that we don't hesitate to call a spade, to mention Xinjiang, to mention Hong Kong, to mention human rights, and to mention Taiwan. And if you allow me to add a little European flavor to a German conversation, I think it is also relevant to take note of the fact that in European policy making, Taiwan has been put on the radar screen much more clearly than that would have been the case in the past. The Indo-Pacific strategy that the European Union published does mention Taiwan quite a few times. This is a new signal of willingness to engage also with Taiwan as a partner. And to end these introductory remarks with one additional argument in favor of describing growing European European activity in the region, both the Global Gateway Initiative that the European Union has published and the new anti-coercion instrument in trade policy signal that the European Union is on its way to become a more proactive geopolitical player, in particular, also with an eye on the Indo-Pacific region. Let me stop there.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer, for your very thoughtful analysis. I'm sure we'll come back to this in the discussion, specifically the question of the anti-coercion instrument and the Gateway Initiative. Last but not least, I now want to turn to Dr. Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp. Dr. Pohlkamp is a visiting fellow at the Asia program of the European Council on Foreign Relations. She previously worked as a Japan analyst based in Munich, as a policy fellow at the Progressives Zentrum Berlin, and as a Japan fellow at the Agora Strategy Group. Previously, she worked at the German Institute for International Security Affairs, SBP, and at the German Institute for Japanese Studies in Tokyo. She is widely published on East Asian security issues and Sino-Japanese relations. Dr. Pohlkamp, on the basis of your expertise, where is the EU heading in the region? Is it considered to be a player? How can the EU and Japan cooperate to help to tone down tensions? Where is our common impact the biggest? Can you also please do this in 5 minutes? That would be great. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I would also like very much to thank the Japanese General Consulate and the DGAP for giving me the chance to talk today on this panel with these honorable speakers, Mr. Bütikofer and Hosoya sensei. And yeah, I will also try to be brief and would like to concentrate my input on EU, Japanese and German-Japanese relations and on cooperation options. So as everyone knows, the relations between Japan and the EU and Japan and Germany have developed and have strengthened very positively in the last years. And Japan is one of the key allies of the EU, and both blocs have many, many things in common. Both emphasize the value-based and normative dimension as one of the foundations of their influence and legitimacy at the global level. And both recognize the central importance of the Indo-Pacific region for their economic and security interests. And this, of course, gives new urgency and has become one of the top priorities of the EU-Japanese and German-Japanese partnership. Japan and the European Union have many, many approaches upon which to build on. And on China, the gap in perception and approaches between Brussels and Tokyo has narrowed, though not closed. And there is significantly more willingness from Europe to engage and consult with countries in the region, such as with key allies as Japan. And Japan, for the EU and for Germany, is a very important political advisor to the region. So on the EU side, a lot has happened in the last year, and the EU started from just mentioning the region towards a real strategy, which is a big step, and has realized that it has a stake in the region, and that it needs to diversify its partnerships in Asia beyond China, both economically and strategically. And in this context, Japan, as a key ally and a very engaged actor in the region itself, and a US alliance partner and a member of the Quad, plays a very central role for Germany and for the EU. And it's not so much anymore about why Europe or the EU or Germany should cooperate with Japan. It is about how to cooperate with Japan and where exactly, in which areas. So I would like to make some suggestions where the EU and Germany have its biggest impact and where cooperation could be promoted. And obviously, trade is by essence a cooperative endeavor, but I believe the EU can also have deeper impact on questions of economic security in the Indo-Pacific. So here the EU strategy takes a broader approach, going beyond concluding more free trade agreements and aiming to work towards resilient and diversified supply chains, stronger rules against unfair practices, such as economic coercion and forced technology transfers, and by working with partners like Japan, for example. And then I also strongly believe that the EU and Germany on member state basis will have the ability to play a very important role in niche areas where the region is looking for alternatives to Chinese investments and technology, and where Europe actually has something to contribute. And of course, these includes digital connectivity and digital alliances and cooperation in new technologies, whether in biotechnology or information and communications technology, the supply chain robustness. And by creating the world's largest secure data flow space, the EU and Japan have already reaffirmed their strong confidence in each other's legal and protection systems, and the strategic partnership agreement specifically provides for sectoral cooperation in the digital domain. Then, of course, climate change. Japan is the first green alliance partner of the EU in the region, and Japan's commitment to carbon neutrality offer promising new opportunities, especially when we think also of a future cooperation on the race of green technology. But then I strongly also believe that the deeper cybersecurity cooperation is a realistic option for stronger cooperation. The ECFR's recent survey on European views of the Indo-Pacific asked what types of security cooperation or support member states would like the EU to invest in, as well as those to which they are ready to contribute. And interestingly, 21 states view cybersecurity as a priority for the EU. And so this is an area which there could be a huge opportunity not only to strengthen Europe's defensive capabilities at home, but also enhance European security beyond. And by leveraging, for example, EU cyber diplomacy and its toolboxes, and the new NIS2 directive, and through Euro-Japanese approaches, they could be combined in these areas and could be enhanced. So the main challenges, however, I see for cooperation are, although the relationship between the EU and Germany are very, very good and have a great momentum at the moment, we have many approaches and we have many ideas, but they should not just remain vague plans and declarations. They should also be translated into real concrete action in order not to miss the great momentum that we currently have, and fall back to neglecting the good relations for more pressing issues. And the other key issue, I believe, which is very important to have in mind, is Japan's very close relationship with the US, and generally speaking, the trilateral relationship between the US, the EU, and Japan. I think this is very central also for future cooperation building in the Indo-Pacific. After all, Japan and the US are very, very strong alliance partners. The EU has to find ways to explain how it wants to position itself in current discussions. Japan and the US also have within the Quad and other alliances, and how it wants to be integrated in current discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pohlkamp, for your interesting points, especially the very concrete areas in which you think a broader cooperation between Germany and Japan, the European Union and Japan could be valuable. After these introductory remarks, I now want to open the discussion amongst the panelists, giving them the opportunity to pick up on points that have been made earlier by others. But in order to structure this a little bit, I want to pick up on the last comments by Dr. Pohlkamp on the trade issues, and connect this with earlier comments made by Reinhard Bütikofer on concrete examples of the, you spoke about the Gateway Initiative and the anti-coercion instrument. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit and enlighten our listeners on what exactly that is and how you evaluate the effectiveness of these proposals, of these instruments?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Indeed, I consider both those measures as constituting a kind of a geopolitical moment for the EU. With the Global Gateway Initiative, we are putting wheels under the car that we constructed in 2018 when we first published the EU-Asia Connectivity Strategy. It went nowhere because there was no funding, there was no governance, there was no strategy, there was just a concern. That is different now. And the scope of the strategy has also been expanded. It's not any longer just along the Eurasian arc. It includes, for instance, regions like Africa. And indeed, in Brussels, we do see a great potential for cooperation with partners like Japan and India in particular in some of those third regions. By the way, this Global Gateway Strategy can also make use of connectivity agreements that have been struck between Japan and the EU in 2019 and between India and the EU in 2021. So we're already on track of having a privileged partnership with those two partners in the Indo-Pacific with regard to connectivity. And I believe that particularly in Southeast Asia, there would be great scope for cooperation with Japan in that regard. And the fact that the president of the European Commission has taken ownership of the strategy, and the fact that Commission has said we want to mobilize up to 300 billion euro signals this is not peanuts. This is not just a sideshow. This is not just a niche initiative. This is meant to be a real active game. And then talking about the anti-coercion instrument, this is interesting because it could end up creating much more leverage in international relations for the EU, because so far on many foreign policy issues, we've always been bogged down by the necessity to create unanimity in the European Council. Every single member state has a veto on issues of foreign policy. If we want to sanction human rights criminals, if a single government opposes that, it can't be done. But on trade, we have a different rule. The trade issues are decided by qualitative majority voting. And that means that if you impose trade measures, you can get around the veto. And by devising an instrument that helps the EU to counter coercive economic policies, like the ones that we're seeing being applied from the Chinese side today against Lithuania or against Australia, all of a sudden the EU acquires greater scope of activity and becoming a real player and moving with the kind of qualitative majority voting that we've always sought for foreign policy, but doing this through the avenue of trade. And I think that will have significant impact.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bütikofer, for these explanations, very helpful. I would now like to turn to Professor Hosoya and maybe get him from his analysis that he gave in the beginning of our discussion more to the policy recommendations that we should pursue. How do you evaluate the German and European policies in the region? Do they significantly contribute to stabilize the situation? Do they use the right instruments? Is this what Europe should do? How do you see this from a Japanese perspective?
Yes, Thank you very much. Exactly. I have agreed with previous two speakers on the importance of EU's initiative, particularly focusing on the global gateway of EU's new strategy. I think this is extremely important because now the EU is regaining its initiative or leadership role in trying to create or enhance rule-based international order. Previously, I think that EU thought that the United States and China were in a driving seats. And sometimes when I joined in this kind of discussion, some European speakers thought that EU was sidetracked or more or less sidelined besides two great giants, powerful giants, of course, the United States and China. But I think that now in the last several years, international community has lost its confidence in China's leadership role, focusing on the Belt and Road Initiative. Previously, I think that the European Union had heavily relied upon China's leadership role, focusing on the importance of the Belt and Road Initiative. But recently, interestingly, in a party Congress speech, President Xi Jinping had hardly mentioned about its own Belt and Road Initiative. Even within China, there were a huge amount of criticism towards the Belt and Road Initiative because many Chinese people now think that the Chinese government should use its own financial resources for Chinese people, not for the others. That's why it is likely that China is losing its momentum to heavily rely on its Belt and Road Initiative. And this actually is coincided with regaining of EU's leadership by focusing on the global gateway. And I think that this EU's role is exactly closely linked with Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific initiative, because this initiative, EU's initiative, actually was basically started with the rise of EU's connectivity strategy. And as is mentioned, in 2018, the content of this EU's connectivity strategy was vague. But in the conference in Brussels in September 2019, when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Brussels, I think that the two sides, Japan and EU, could agree with many points on what we should do together by focusing on multilateralism and by focusing on the importance of rule-based international order, and also by focusing on the importance of inclusiveness. So the two sides, the two parts, Japan and EU, had many things in common. So they actually agreed and they regained, I would say, confidence in trying to regain its, initiative in global politics. Otherwise, the United States and China, the two giants, could control the world. But EU and Japan actually share a common interest in focusing on non-military measures like international law, international institutions, peaceful resolution of conflict, and so on. That's fine. I think that the EU and Japan can share common measure to solve difficult questions. On the other hand, United States, even though United States is Japan's most important ally, but United States and China can rely more on its military power, unlike both EU and Japan. That's why I think that now, after several years of losing their own initiatives, both Japan and the EU are regaining its important international identity and international initiative by focusing on non-military tools to solve international conflict, and also to focusing on the importance of rule-based international order. So without the efforts made by both Germany and Japan, or Japan and the European Union, rule-based international order cannot be sustained, because both the United States and the UK are now focusing more on minilateralism, focusing on the Quad and also AUKUS. They prefer now this kind of a much smaller initiatives rather than much larger framework of international institutions or multilateral institutions such as United Nations or NATO or some other, these kind, like of course CPTPP as well. So in this sense, I think that last year and this year, particularly after the COVID-19 crisis, I think that the EU and Japan are fully aware of the importance of strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy is now used by the ruling party of Japan, LDP, as well. And I think that in the new national security strategy, which will be actually defined next year, I think that we will see some kind of similar words as strategic autonomy and so on. So in this sense, I think that well, it's a really good timing for us to discuss on this topic because we are now moving forward. We are regaining confidence, and also we are in a driving seat. And this actually started in actually February 2019, 2 years before, when the two sides agreed on the EPA and SPA, Economic Partnership Agreement and a Strategic Partner Agreement between the two sides. This was the turning point, I would say. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosoya. I'm very intrigued to hear, after the description of the dangerous situation in the beginning, you now turn a little bit to an optimistic note, which is always very helpful in a debate. Also, I'm intrigued by the fact that strategic autonomy has become an export article from the European Union. So we'll see how that goes. How that goes in the future. We've talked about the analysis in the region. We've talked about economic aspects. We've talked about political aspects. I want to draw the attention of the panel now to the more security aspects. And obviously, the role of the European Union is much stronger and Germany in the economic field, but not so much in the security field. Now, the old government has sent out the German Navy frigate Bayern, which has been received very well in Japan and other places. But of course, this is a very small contribution, giving a signal, not more. So what? And the question is addressed to all panelists. How do you see the role of Europe, of Germany in the security field? Is there a role at all? I mean, a real role besides just signaling, or does it mean we would have to support the Americans politically and militarily if need be, if they are moving more towards the East Asian theater? How do you see this security aspect of the whole equation? Maybe we start with Dr. Pohlkamp.
Yeah, thank you. Well, in my general opinion or personal opinion, the EU cannot provide real security guarantees and is very well aware of that. So the EU is no security alliance, and although the EU has a steadily growing security dimension, it is not a defense treaty organization. And sovereign member states, they have their armed forces and they individually have their interests in defense fields such as France. But the EU as a whole is not there yet. And it is faced with very limited resources there. Of course, the EU largely relies on trade and infrastructure technology investment, as we already said, and much less on the security and defense part. And I believe in this regard, their priorities, at least at the moment, lie much more in its nearer neighborhood. However, they try to show symbolically military presence via its member states, and with naval presences from France and Germany, and also the Netherlands that was sent forth. So meaningful European naval presence and making sure there is more intra-European coordination, particularly through mechanisms like this coordinated maritime presences, is very important. And the EU wants to engage in areas of security within their capabilities and does so with huge financial investments, for example, in capacity building, in cybersecurity resilience, in counterterrorism, maritime resilience, fishery, and climate neutrality. And I believe we should not underestimate that, but there are, of course, limits. And on member state basis, we see more engagement also from the German side. We have the 2+2 talks with Japan, for example, and we have the new intelligence agreement with Japan. So I think there is slowly an approach towards that, but within realistic limits in hard security fields, because I believe the EU and also from the Japanese side, both are well aware that these are not their key areas of engagement. And in my opinion, I don't believe that Japan realistically expects to do that from the European side, besides working within their resources, especially on the diplomatic side and on international fora, or, for example, enhancing niche areas and go beyond through cybersecurity measures. This could be one aspect for more engagement of the European Union, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pohlkamp. Reinhard Bütikofer, do you share her views?
Yes, indeed. I think we have to start from a realistic assessment. Sending the frigate, the German frigate, to the Indo-Pacific, that has had nothing to do with security. That was political signaling, and it was worthwhile, but we should recognize it for what it is. Even though the EU in its Indo-Pacific strategy pledged to do more, that will still be a limited effort. The EU has set out to have a comprehensive, joint, continuous naval presence in the Indo-Pacific. If that could be achieved, that would be a new stage. But even that would not even amount to a tripwire presence. So it would be very low key, just again signaling we are here because we have an interest in the region and we want to partner with like-minded countries and others to solve some of the issues. So I think our major contribution will certainly be in other dimensions of security. And as we experience the securitization of all things economic, there is a lot we can contribute in that regard. Cybersecurity has been mentioned, but I would also mention specific issues like rare earth, for instance. If we recall that about 10 years ago, over the dispute around the Senkaku Islands, all of a sudden China blocked the exportation of rare earth. We experienced, both Japan and us experienced, that there is a weak spot that we have. At the time, there was a trilateral effort between Japan, the US, and the EU to work on these issues. That has fallen by the wayside. I regret that very much. After the pressure went down and the prices for rare earth went down again, but the geopolitical situation is still unchanged, and it's favorable for China in that regard. And this could be an area for cooperation. Also, there are other economic dimensions that contribute to security, like, for instance, standardization. Are we going to have an international regime of economic relations with shared standards, or will we have a nationalization of standard regimes? China is playing the second fiddle, working in the second dimension. So will we team up? I mean, in practical terms, the EU and the US have agreed on a Trade and Technology Council, a Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council. I would see a lot of reasons for the EU and Japan to make a similar effort to work on trade and technology issues by taking account of the security dimensions that are included in that approach.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer, for these very interesting and concrete proposals that you made. Before I turn to Professor
Ambassador Nikel, you're cutting in and out. Maybe if you switch off your video for a moment.
Shall I talk? It's like a crossword puzzle. I have to guess what he is intending to say. Maybe he asked me, as far as I suppose, to follow up to speakers.
Yes, please.
And, yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I actually agree with most of the point with the previous two speakers. So there are not so many things that I can add, but from the point of view of Japan, I like to say that both Japan and the EU have to do two contradictory things together. On one hand, we have to enhance our deterrence. We have to enhance our defense capabilities, because otherwise we will be irrelevant in the Pacific vis-a-vis the powerful United States and China. So we have to make an extra effort to strengthen our defense capabilities. This is one thing that we have to do. To do that, by doing this, we can prevent war happening. In 2011 and 12, it was argument in Japan that China was intending to change the status quo by force of the Senkaku Islands. But at that time, Japanese government and the United States government were enhancing its alliance partnership and military cooperation to prevent this happening. In 2014, in April, President Obama, for the first time as the US president, declared that the United States would actually protect the Senkaku Islands. So this actually prevented the war happening. Also, in the last 1 or 2 years, China was trying to change the status quo in some of the islands, Rocky Island, and which belonged to Taiwan. Of course, it was quite impossible for China to invade the mainland Taiwan because it's too huge. But it was not impossible for China to perhaps take some of the smaller islands, uninhabited islands. And Reuters News reported recently that in April, President Xi Jinping abandoned some of the military plan to change the status quo of some of the islands, uninhabited islands. So in this sense, deterrence worked and mattered. And without sufficient amount of deterrence, China would to take an opportunity to change the status quo as it did in the South China Sea. But East China Sea is different because the United States is there. In South China Sea, it was much more difficult for the United States to maintain the status quo. That's why it was overturned. But in East China Sea, it is possible for the United States to maintain the status quo so far. But in many military simulations in the United States and in China as well, if something happened in East China Sea, in many cases, China could easily defeat the US forces because it usually takes 2 months or several weeks to gather sufficient amount of US forces, which actually were deployed all over the world. But the Chinese military forces is basically concentrated both in East China Sea and South China Sea, naval forces. In that sense, China has some advantage in trying to exclude American military commitment there. So in many ways, we have to build up sufficient amount of deterrence by spending more money, financial resources to strengthen our defense capability. But at the same time, we also have to say that Japan and EU are not the United States. We don't have to imitate American military law. Our role is different. We have to depend on much more non-military measures because China prefers, unlike Russia, China prefers indirect strategy, indirect measure to change the status quo. It means cyber security, the cyber attacks, economic security, and political warfare. So Japan and EU need further cooperation to enhance this kind of reaction to Chinese cyber attacks, economic security, and also, the economic coercion, and also political warfare. So in this way, I think that even though we need a stronger defense, but we don't have to imitate American military law. Both EU and Japan have our own role in emphasizing much more on non-military tools. So in that sense, I think that division of labor within the international community, within the like-minded liberal democracies, is becoming more important. And both Japan and Germany needs to be aware of our own role in defending ourselves, and also in stabilizing international relations by sufficiently doing our role in the international community. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosoya. I apologize for the technical problems. If I saw correctly, Reinhard Bütikofer wanted to answer directly to and possibly Dr. Pohlkamp as well. Yes, please do. And afterwards, then I would like to open the floor for questions from the floor, either in person or via the chat. Please.
Just a short remark. I do sign on to the concept of deterrence, as I agree with what Professor Hosoya said there. But I would emphasize also his last remark. From a European point of view, the main challenge will be non-military deterrence. Look at what we're discussing at the moment with regard to the impending or hypothetical Russian aggression against Ukraine. We're not discussing sending troops. We're discussing closing the SWIFT system to the Russians. We're discussing stopping the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We're discussing political and economic countermeasures. And I think that's the approach where we have strength if we can muster the will to act. Because we have to understand also that you don't do that without paying a price also on your own side. But I think that with regard to the security in the Pacific, Europe's role will not be in the military dimension at all. But Europe can contribute to the security and safety by volunteering to clarify that we are willing to invest heavily in non-military, in political and economic deterrence against any unsettling, unbalancing acts from whichever side.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer. Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp, please, shortly, if possible.
Yeah, very shortly. I just want to add that I completely agree, because I think for the European Union, it was very, very important that they actually released Global Gateway, because it had also a very symbolic, strong symbol towards the region that we don't just have the EU strategy and now we stop our engagement. We try to go beyond. And I think beyond is very important in this context. As Reinhard Bütikofer already said, deterrence in the military sense is not our strength, but identifying alternative areas of complementarity among existing US or EU or regional initiatives in smaller areas where the EU can realistically contribute. I think this is the key also for better Japanese and EU cooperation. And I don't think that it is necessary to reinvent the wheel, and maybe start small, see where cooperation approaches already exist, and expand these and work complementarily to existing initiatives in the region. And I don't think it's about working against, but it's, as the spirit of FOIP already said, it's about inclusiveness and cooperation promotion. So I think this can be a very, very big asset for the EU. But therefore, the EU really has to clarify, as Reinhard Bütikofer already said, its position, where they stand in these existing conversations and all these policy areas, how exactly are they positioned? They have to make that clear to regional partners in order to identify good cooperation approaches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There's a question come in from Vanessa Rehn, who is asking how feasible it is to have to develop a European policy on China, given the differing views on China amongst EU members. Maybe that's a question for Reinhard Bütikofer.
Well, there's of course always a short answer and a long answer. I go for the short answer here. I think we are converging more on China policy than is usually understood in the public. We do often highlight the instances where a single member country, like Hungary in the case of the South China Sea Award, blocks European togetherness and European effective positioning. But what I would emphasize is that with regard to economic instruments, trade defense instruments like anti-dumping, anti-subsidy, anti-coercion, international procurement instrument, banning products of forced labor, human rights due diligence, and so on, the EU has been developing common approaches, investment screening included. 5 years ago, most of that would not have been possible to get through the European Council. Now it's being promoted. And the fact that Germany is now joining the European bandwagon and tries to choose a more European approach towards China is a great additional benefit for European strength.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer, for that clarification. Professor Hosoya, there was a question in the chat on the change of government in Japan and whether that would have any impact on the discussion we have here. Is this the new government taking a clearer line or a more specific line on these points?
Thank you very much. Maybe both. I mean, well, perhaps the Kishida administration, the current administration, will be the most liberal government in the last 20 years, because Kishida leads the liberal wing within the LDP, unlike the previous cabinets in Japan. Abe and some others also as well, they actually are much more conservative within LDP in the sense, well, Kishida's government will become much more cooperative in its relationship with China, particularly Foreign Minister Hayashi is perhaps one of the most internationalist type members within the LDP. So he has many friends in China, he has many friends in Korea, he has many friends in the United States. He studied in the Harvard Kennedy School, so he speaks English very well. So in that sense, I think that Foreign Minister Hayashi will be trying to create a better relationship with China, even though he relies still heavily on the US-Japan alliance. He has a right balance in creating a better international environment. But this is very difficult because some of the conservative direct members within the LDP would be critical to Hayashi's or Kishida's liberal policy towards China. That's why maybe I think the current government needs to show its strong and tough stance towards China. And within a few days or within a few weeks, Japanese government must decide further. Japanese government will send some of the cabinet ministers or prime minister himself to the Beijing Olympic Games. Already United States government and the Australian government declined to send their senior political leaders to China, to Beijing Olympic Game, Winter Olympic Game. But I don't know whether the Japanese government will decide soon, because the current administration, as I said, is trying to strike the balance. But it means that it will takes time to show clear stance. It will mean that it will be criticized by the both sides. So I think that the current administration will face a very difficult choice, whether to create a better relationship with China or whether to be aligned with the United States to criticize China on human rights issues.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosoya. We have another 8 minutes. So I would think that that we take the last round now. I want to ask my team, is there anybody who has raised their hand who wants to take the floor before we give the floor to the panelists for their final remarks? This is not the case there. So I'll give you the floor to all of you right away. Just two points. That one came up in the chat, rather surprising question about the nuclear wastewater from Fukushima and its impact on the security in the region. Maybe you can, Professor Hosoya, you can, in your concluding remarks, address this point which has been raised in the chat as well. And I would like to ask all of you on the point Professor Hosoya has made on the Olympic boycott or the diplomatic boycott that the US has decided. This is debated in the German press today, very much so. So I would like to hear your comments on these issues, and you can of course in your concluding remark address every issue that you want. And please, we have, as I said, about 7 minutes, so that makes 2 minutes each. Please, who wants to start? Let's say Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp.
Oh yes, yes please.
Hosoya Sensei, you can start also because of the Fukushima question, and I don't have a very good answer on that. So please start and I follow up.
Okay, Professor Hosoya, on the Fukushima question, please.
Okay, I will subsume, but well, I have many friends in China, and I regularly visit China. And we shouldn't isolate China, first of all. And China is basically a very peaceful country which doesn't like a war, of course, as well as ourselves. So we have same interest to try to avoid war. So in that sense, I don't think that I need to touch upon the Fukushima nuclear wastewater issue because this is directed by Chinese government. So he needs to say that. But we don't have to isolate foreign ministry, China's foreign ministry, because we have the most internationalist people there. They are in a very difficult situation because nationalism is stronger in China. So we have to encourage, the internationalists in China to try to collaborate with international community. I believe that China can do it because the Japanese approach is not to isolate China. Please remember that in 1990s, Japan was the first country to loosen economic sanctions against China soon after the Tiananmen Square incident of 1989. And Japan was the first country to lead to bring China into the WTO. And Japan is the country which put the biggest amount of FDA and ODA to China. So we need richer, stable China. In that way, we need still quite internationalists, Chinese diplomats and officials and politicians. And we have it. And that's why we try to encourage them that China, the future lies in international cooperation. So that's why I don't think that it's a good way for Chinese diplomats to focusing simply on criticizing on nuclear wastewater issues, but try to find a way together how we can collaborate to create a more prosperous and stable regional order. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hosoya. Elli-Katharina Pohlkamp, please.
Yeah, on your question of the Olympics, very quick. Well, that the US reacts in this way is not very, very surprising, and I think it's you know, putting a message out in the world. If the others will follow, I don't know. It's very difficult, as Hosoya Sensei has already said, also in the spirit of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and also of the Japanese and the EU stance, not to exclude China from everything, but also try to include and at least have diplomatic good relations. It's a very difficult situation, and yeah, I guess I cannot give you a very clear answer on that. As for my final remarks, as I previously said, the EU-Japanese and German-Japanese relations are in a very, very good place at the moment. But yeah, the biggest challenge is that they remain good relations, and that they don't get neglected, and that no other pressing issues, you know, come first, and that they continue their very positive approach.
Thank you very much. Now, Reinhard Bütikofer for the last concluding remarks. And please, an answer on the Olympic question.
Thank you very much. 3 short remarks in 2 minutes. First, I would hope that next year we will indeed see the first German-Japanese government consultation, the first in a series of hopefully continuous exchanges that deepen our relationship. Second, we have mentioned concepts of strategic autonomy and strategic sovereignty. What I would want to emphasize is the concept of strategic solidarity between democracies that you find in the coalition contract. I think that is also a very important concept. And thirdly, about the Olympics, I'm clearly in favor of a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. That's the position that the European Parliament has adopted with an overwhelming majority. And the reason for that is very simple. We cannot normalize crimes against humanity. And what China is doing in Xinjiang amounts to crimes against humanity. Some parliaments say even it's genocide. But at any rate, it is unacceptable behavior. China is also breaking all kinds of international rules and agreements with regard to Hong Kong, with regard to the South China Sea, for instance. China is pursuing an aggressive policy, and I think it is necessary to send a signal to the leaders in Beijing that the democratic world is not going to normalize that kind of behavior. We're not going to sit there applauding while they cover up their political crimes.
Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer. I really want to praise you for being very short and concise, and at the same time, very interesting remarks. I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners learned a lot from this debate. And it really shows to me that there's a lot of scope of cooperation for Japan and Germany on these issues. Thank you very much, Reinhard Bütikofer, for this interesting, very concrete proposal of the government consultations. I'm sure that will be taken up by your colleagues in the government. And I think we really agree to a large extent on the nature of the problem, on the kinds of responses, reactions that we can give together. And if we do that, we may in fact contribute to a stabilization in the region, avoiding the kind of conflict that everybody wants to avoid in this region and beyond. So thank you again very much to all of you for participating. Thank you for making time in your schedule, and hopefully you'll be with us on another occasion. We would really appreciate it. And I also want to thank, by the same token, all the people who have been organizing this. I think they've done a great job, and we're looking forward to a next meeting in this cycle. Thank you very much and have a great day. Bye-bye.